Introducing Selleys PointWorks Gen 2, the pointing system that gives you the option of applying an accelerant spray for resistance in cold, humid and wet conditions, and a retardant spray for hot and windy conditions. Selleys PointWorks Gen 2 complies with Australian standard 4046.8 adhesive mechanical fasteners flexible pointing. Correctly installed, it removes the need for fastening clips on hip and ridge tiles as required by AS 2050 installation of roof tiles. Until the early 90s, only cement-based mixers were used for pointing. When ready-to-use flexible pointing was introduced, it was a major breakthrough, as it allowed for better colour consistency, reduced cracking and less wastage. Following this period, many flexible pointing products became available. However, these ready-to-use water-based compounds introduced some new issues. They are slow to achieve rain resistance in wet and cold conditions, which often leads to costly rework having to be carried out. Also, premature skinning occurs in hot and windy weather. Widespread use of flexible pointing initiated the need for quality standards, resulting in Appendix F being introduced to Australian Standard 2050, 1995, installation of roof tiles. The Australian Standard 2050 was amended to include performance requirements of adhesive mechanical fastening material, as an alternative to mechanically fastening every ridge tile. These requirements are specified in Australian Standard 4046.8. Further, Australian Standard 2050 required that only pointing meeting these requirements was allowed to be labelled as adhesive mechanical fastening. All other non-compliant flexible pointing was only marked as flexible pointing. Most flexible pointing compounds on the market continue to claim compliance to the original Australian Standard 2050-1995 Appendix F. Selleys PointWorks Gen 2 was the first flexible pointing to comply with the new standard.
Lab testing involved hold-down strength testing. Theoretically, the hold-down strength after 3 days immersion should be in excess of 0.3 newtons per square millimetre. PointWorks Gen 2 significantly and consistently exceeded this requirement. In fact, the bond strength is so strong that on some occasions the PointWorks Gen 2 caused delamination of the tiles.
To ensure maximum surface contact area between pointing and ridge tile, it is advised that tilers rake wet bedding immediately under the ridges with the head of a screw. Ensure that surfaces are clean and free of loose material and holes before pointing. This will ensure a neat finish and strong adhesion. Test roofs were installed at the CSIRO testing facility at North Ryde in accordance with Australian Standard 4046.8 using PointWorks Gen 2 pointing. After drying, the test roofs were subjected to 72 hours water soaking, then cyclic pressure testing that emulates Category 3 cyclonic wind conditions.
The idea of the test is to emulate wind gusts of 3 to 5 seconds. As the test involves over 10,000 cycles, this takes approximately 9 to 10 hours to complete. One of the roofs was subjected to a further 72 hours water soak. This was followed by testing to wind conditions C4 with an ultimate design pressure of 11.09 kilopascals. Remarkably, this roof withstood both C3 and C4 cyclonic wind conditions. Well, when we decommissioned the tiles at the CSIRO, we could see that the collars had actually delaminated some of the roof tiles.
All water-based ready-to-use flexible pointing products face the problem of extended drying time in cold, wet and humid conditions. This increases the risk of problems occurring due to rain exposure prior to drying, commonly referred to as slump or washout. Selleys developed an accelerant spray for PointWorks Gen 2 designed to provide early weather resistance in cold, humid and wet conditions. In this test, PointWorks Gen 2 is applied along with two competitive products. PointWorks Gen 2 is then sprayed with the accelerant. After drying for a minimum of 15 minutes, a fine water mist is applied to all three products. As you can see, the competitors are beginning to wash out. The accelerant spray has allowed Pointworks Gen 2 to prevent this from occurring. In this demonstration, a competitor's product and Pointworks Gen 2 are applied to a glazed ridge tile. Pointworks Gen 2 is sprayed with accelerant. After 2 hours drying in a refrigerator, they are placed under cascading water. After a minimum of 15 minutes, the competitor product washes away. In repeated tests, Pointworks Gen 2 lasted more than 2 hours. In hotter climates, a different problem can occur. Ready-to-use pointing can dry too quickly and starts to skin in the pail, creating lumps or dags, making it difficult to tool. Selleys have developed a Pointworks Gen 2 retardant spray that prevents premature skinning in the pail, extending tooling time. Selleys is proud to introduce Pointworks Gen 2, as well as Pointworks Gen 2 accelerant and retardant sprays. Pointworks Gen 2 is the first flexible pointing compound to exceed the requirement of Australian Standard 4046.8, Adhesive Mechanical Fasteners Flexible Pointing. Correctly installed, Pointworks Gen 2 removes the need for fastening clips on hip and ridge tiles as required by Australian Standard 2050 installation of roof tiles. In addition to this, the accelerant spray gives early weather resistance in cold, humid and wet conditions, which avoids costly rework. Selleys' Pointworks Gen 2 system gives you the advantage.